I've got a bone to pick with rich people who avoid paying their fair share.
Do you tax them? Would you get that money back?
Absolutely. I mean, we should have a progressive tax system which says to billionaires, you're going to pay your fair share of taxes.
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes.
Politicians and pundits are constantly talking about billionaires paying their fair share. That if only these greedy billionaires would chip in some more to our society, that we would be able to solve many of the great problems that we face today. We would have more money for social programs, our teachers, policemen, and firefighters would get paid what they deserve. And we could really start making some inroads into the ever-increasing national debt. Just alone, the top 10 billionaires in the United States control over $1 trillion of wealth, more than the bottom 10%. On its face value, this seems like a logical conclusion to draw. That yes, this is a massive problem that our society faces, and it seems reasonable to think that if we could get some more money from these greedy billionaires, it would do a lot of good for our country. The problem is that that is all just a lie. This is not to say it's a lie that the massive inequality is a problem. That you could make a strong argument for. But in this video, I will examine that when you actually dig into the real numbers. Why getting more money from billionaires won't make any significant difference at all. To truly understand the scope of this issue, you need to understand how much money the US federal government takes in by revenue each year and how much they end up spending. When you understand this, you will see the massive problem we are in. And you will then realize that our primary culprit is not the greedy billionaires, but the career politicians who have essentially bankrupted the US federal government and stuck its younger citizens with an exponentially growing debt, with no real way to ever pay it back. First, let's take a look at the US national debt. To first understand the debt, you need to know how it has been built up over many years. Let's examine three primary categories: yearly revenue, yearly spending, and cumulative debt. Whereas yearly revenue and spending are split into a calendar year, and cumulative debt is a separate category that is accumulated over many years. When yearly revenue is less than yearly spending, as we see here, a deficit is created. To make up this difference, the government needs to print money in the form of treasury bills, and then that deficit amount is added to the cumulative debt. Then you go into the next calendar year, and if a deficit is created again, it will be added to the new cumulative debt, and the cycle continues. Now let's dive into the actual numbers and look at the US national debt that has been accumulated from 1981 until now. The total debt is measured on the y-axis in trillions of dollars, and when you look at this graph, this is where it gets a little scary. As you can see, in 1981, the debt was a little bit less than $1 trillion. It took 27 years to build the debt from 1 trillion to 10 trillion. It then only took 9 years to go from 10 to 20 trillion, and then it took just 5 years to go from 20 to 30 trillion, with a lot being added in 2020 because of COVID. And now you can see where we are at today, sitting around $36 trillion of national debt. But even more alarming than the total amount of debt is how much we are now adding to it each year. If we look at the last 6 years, you will see this alarming trend. We added 4.2 trillion from 2019 to 20, the biggest jump in history. The following year, we added 1.48 trillion, then 2.5 trillion, 2.2 trillion, and last year we added 2.6 trillion. And this year, we will add around that amount again. Let's go back to that revenue, spending, and debt chart and start by looking at our yearly revenue in 2024 up to this point in the year. And this is from the US Treasury's official website. As you can see, up to this point in 2024, the federal government has collected $4.92 trillion, a massive revenue stream. So what do they spend it on? Of that, 2.43 trillion of that is federal income tax, 1.71 trillion on Social Security and Medicare tax, 530 billion in corporate tax, and then 263 billion from other various smaller taxes. 4.92 trillion seems like plenty of money to cover our expenditures, but as you will see, it is not even close to enough. At this same point in the year, the government has spent a whopping $6.75 trillion. And what on? 1.46 trillion is spent on Social Security, 912 billion on healthcare, and then a massive 882 billion on debt interest, even more than the military. Then we spend 874 billion on national defense, another 874 on Medicare, 671 billion to income security programs, and then a little over $1 trillion to veterans, education, and other smaller services. If we average out for the rest of the year, we will end up adding about 2.1 trillion to the debt this year, leaving us with a total debt a little over 36 trillion at year's end. So that is the situation our government is currently in. But we do have a lot of billionaires that are out there not paying their fair share. If they started paying what they actually should, we could probably improve this situation. So that gets us into our second major topic, billionaire wealth, And here we will look to answer two major questions. How many billionaires are in the United States, and how much wealth do they hold? Let's start with the first question. How many are living in the US? If you do a quick Google search, you will find anywhere from around 750 to 800. Some sources say a little more, with some going as much as 813. Now, to the second question, how much wealth do they hold as a group? When you do another quick Google search, you find anywhere between $5 trillion to $6 trillion of wealth totaled up in 2024. So for sake of argument, let's say $6 trillion. Now, what we are going to do is make up an admittedly unrealistic hypothetical scenario. So in this hypothetical, let's say that you were able to somehow pass a law and confiscate all of that wealth and use it for the federal government. How much would that help our debt problem? Let's see. So let's say in 2025, this magic law is passed, and our budget is essentially the same as 2024. So we have $6 trillion in revenue and $8 trillion in spending, which leaves us with a $2 trillion deficit. But here comes our saving grace, all the wealth held by US billionaires. An extra $6 trillion to the rescue. Now we have a budget of $12 trillion, which will leave us with a phenomenal $4 trillion surplus. We can use that surplus to bring down our national debt to $32 trillion. Amazing. But now we still have to worry about 2026. So assume revenue and spending are essentially the same as 2024. We are back to a $2 trillion deficit. And now the debt is back to $34 trillion. And in 2027, we will add another $2+ trillion, and we are back to square one. Except now, we don't even have any tax revenue at all coming from these billionaires, and the cycle is in no better of a situation. But that is a hypothetical scenario that would never happen. Let's look at an actual proposal. Here, Joe Biden outlines a plan to make the billionaires pitch in their fair share.
I had a tax code that charged them 25%. Not the highest rate, 25%. You know how much that would raise over the next 10 years? $400 billion. $40 billion a year. Imagine what we could do.
The plan is to raise $400 billion over a 10-year period, which would add $40 billion a year to our federal budget, as Biden says. So this yellow addition is what that would look like in our budget. So our federal budget would go from $6 trillion to $6.04 trillion. And as a result, the deficit would go from $2 trillion to $1.96 trillion. So there you have it. That is the reality of where we are at. A little disheartening, but it begs the question. If the billionaire wealth won't help much, how do we get ourselves on the right track with this problem? Now, I'm just a random guy, so take this with a grain of salt, but I only see two ways to reverse our situation. First, you can increase taxes on the masses and try to increase our yearly revenue. But something tells me the masses would not be a fan of this. So that brings me to the second option, try and decrease our federal spending, and really to try and examine this pie chart and see which programs can be scaled back or cut altogether. Hopefully there is a solution, but I am just a guy who can point a problem out. Pointing it out is the easy part. Hopefully someone out there can find a solution and get us on the right track and get that debt trending downwards and not in the current direction it is going. Thank you for watching, and if you found this video interesting, let me know in the comments which topic you would want to see another similar video on.